Any clear spells across Scotland and Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England. A few mist and fog patches could form by dawn. However, it's across southern parts of the country where we'll see the cloudiest skies. Away from the cloud, a chilly start once again with temperatures in the single figures, but under the sheet of cloud, a milder start compared with Tuesday, albeit with grey skies. The clearest skies will be across Northern Ireland, Northern England and much of Scotland. In sheltered spots, away from main urban areas and away from hilltops, temperatures could be as low as 3 to 6 Celsius, and any mist and fog could last until 9 or 10 a.m. before disappearing. Once the mist and fog does disappear, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England sees once again a beautiful sunny day, and across central and southern parts through the afternoon the cloud will disappear back to the east coast where it could linger in places, and then another sunny day is expected for the vast majority. 24 or 25 Celsius possible in places, feeling warm in the sun, but there'll be less sun around on Thursday morning. A bit more cloud across eastern, central and southern England as well as East Wales. Once again, that cloud should retreat back to the east coast through the afternoon, but in some places it could stick around for most of the day. Friday, plenty of showers developing across England and Wales, drier and sunnier further north.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems in North Yorkshire. The A1M is down to a single lane northbound from junction 50 to 51, just north of Ripon, following a collision where a car overturned involved in that accident, and recovery work is still taking place. And in East Yorkshire, the M62 eastbound partly blocked, junction 36 to 37 between Goole and Howden, following an accident. On the Surrey stretch of the M25, a broken down car is blocking off the inside lane clockwise 9 to 10 in the roadworks as you head towards the A3, adding to the congestion. In East London, the Chingford Road at Chingford, that's still closed following an accident, leaving a number of buses having to divert. And the M5 in Somerset is down to a single lane northbound at junction 22 at the Burnham-on-Sea exit. Everyone's been squeezed into the outside lane past the scene of an accident involving 2 lorries, where recovery work's underway. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
You could be the next Great British Giveaway winner with a whopping £36,000 in tax-free cash in your bank account. Imagine getting the winning phone call for that.
I've got some really good news for you. You've won £30,000.
£30,000 cash? Oh my God, I'm going to cry. That's brilliant news.
For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained. I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. £75 million has been pledged for the new Border Security Command, but will it work? We have an exclusive from the Rotherham grooming gang's trial and sentencing last week, one that will shock you, I think. Labour now backtracking on the petrol car ban. They're going back to 2035, but I'm just not so sure that EVs are as popular as everyone thought. And we will talk about the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump within a space of a month. I did chat with him last night. We'll debate and discuss just what is going wrong with our politics. But before all of that, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. I'm Sophia Wensler with your headlines at 7 o'clock. First, to the Middle East, where it's understood at least 8 people have been killed and 2,700 injured, including members of the Hezbollah terrorist group, when their communication pages exploded. You can see here footage appearing to show the moment one of the devices exploded. It's being described as the biggest security breach so far in nearly a year of conflict with Israel. Hezbollah claim Israel is to blame for the pager blast, adding they will get fair punishment. Meanwhile, the Israeli military say top commanders have held a situational assessment in response. Back in the UK, the government says it is tackling small boat crossings on all fronts following news that 10,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats since Labour came to power in July. Home Office figures show 65 more migrants arrived on Monday, bringing the year's total to nearly 23,600, though that's down 1% from this time last year. The latest crossings follow the deaths of 8 migrants over the weekend as the government boosts funding for border security. Home Secretary Yvette Coopers announced £75 million for more officers, cameras and technology to combat people smuggling. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says he's also looking at Italy's immigration policies for possible solutions. In other news, Health Secretary Wes Streeting says the end of a pay dispute with junior doctors marks a first step in the government's mission to reform the broken health service. Members of the British Medical Association have voted to accept the government's offer of a 22% pay rise over 2 years. However, the Conservatives are warning the government not to set a precedent by awarding striking workers with what they've described as bumper pay rises. And in the US, Donald Trump has spoken publicly for the first time since being targeted in an apparent assassination attempt on his Florida golf course. Speaking in a live stream on social media, the former president described being grabbed by Secret Service agents after 4 or 5 gunshots rang out. 58-year-old Ryan Routh is facing federal gun charges after a Secret Service agent spotted a rifle poking through the bushes and opened fire on the suspect. Mr. Trump's also praised his protection team and, in a rare show of political unity, commended President Joe Biden for calling him.
I was with an agent, and the agent did a fantastic job. There was no question that we were off that course. I would have loved to have sank that last putt, but we decided, well, let's get out of here. We do need more people on my detail because we have 50, 60,000 people showing up to events, and other people don't have that.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. More than 10,000 people now have crossed the English Channel and been processed through Dover since Keir Starmer became the Prime Minister. That includes 801 who came on Saturday alone. It brings the total since this whole thing began to an incredible 137,000. But it's all going to be OK because we have a new Border Security Command and we're going to put a £75 million investment into it, money that we won't be now spending on Rwanda. And the plan is that the National Crime Agency will work together with MI5 and other agencies, but also will work with Europol, and there'll be National Crime Agency officers in Bulgaria, one of the places where dinghies and engines get smuggled in, and across Europe. But the question, I suppose, is, will this work? Love to get your thoughts on that, Farage at GBNews.com. I have to say, I have no great confidence that it will, because it seems to me that if you smash the gangs, even if you do smash the gangs, the money these people can make is so great that others will come and fill their place. It's rather like sort of whack-a-mole. I just don't believe it's going to work. I don't believe it can be done. I'm joined tonight in the studio by Richard Drax, former Conservative Member of Parliament, by Matthew Talbot, former Labour advisor. But first, I'm going to go to Dr. Mike Jones of Migration Watch UK. I suppose, Mike, in fairness to Starmer, the fact we now have National Crime Agency officers embedded with other police forces around Europe might give us better intelligence?
Well, yeah, I mean, in theory, I'm not against a more sort of transnational, international approach to the illegal migration crisis because it's a transnational phenomenon. But we're already doing this. We did this under the Conservative government. We have cooperation with Turkey. We have cooperation with France. We cooperate with Europol, Frontex, the European Commission. So this transnational approach is already taking place.
Are you really saying that all the Labour government are doing is more of what was happening already?
Yeah, it's imitation, but under a different name. So, you know, we now have this sort of central command unit, but Priti Patel essentially had a very similar organisation, the CCTC, and it effectively did what the Starmer government is now intending to do. Now, in principle, I'm not against governments from doing this. If you can share information, make life difficult for the gangs, for so on, I'm fine. But you can't smash the gangs by doing this. You have to make their business model redundant. And how do you do that? You need to detain and deport. You need to get rid of people.
As we used to do.
Yeah.
And not that many years ago. So you're not particularly confident this is going to make much difference?
It will make a difference to the margins, but it's not going to solve the issue.
No. Well, Matthew Talbot, this was an issue that did the last government enormous electoral harm. I mean, enormous electoral harm. And it's an issue that, particularly in the Red Wall, those Midlands, and not purely, but those Midlands and Northern seats, this issue still resonates. Starmer's got a problem, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think whoever would have won earlier this year would have had a problem. And I think, you know, I don't mind liberal levels of immigration if, and there is a big if there's the infrastructure there to sustain it. And at the moment, we've been let down by successive governments who haven't built enough houses, enough schools, maybe allowed too much cheap labour to come in during New Labour's era. If this is more tinkering around the edge, where parties such as the Conservatives or maybe your own can capitalise, they have got a huge problem. I actually think safe and legal routes could have helped ease this. And I can see the grimaces from the pair of you.
Well, I mean, here's the point, right? We have actually taken 500,000 refugees since 2016. It's an unbelievable number, albeit quite a lot from Ukraine, some of whom may go back. I don't know. We'll see. But it's not as if we haven't been very, very generous. The problem with this is illegal immigration being pursued by criminal gangs. It's 90% young men, unidentified young men. I mean, I believe it's actually a national security emergency.
Mm-hmm. No, it may well be. I think the problem is it can be termed illegal immigration, but obviously there isn't really illegal immigration, because if you're to travel via whatever means...
Well, what else are we going to call it?
Well, listen, the law needs changing then, if that's the case. I understand the point you're trying to put forward.
Well, Labour want to tell us it's called irregular migration.
Yeah, well, maybe that's the case. I think with regards to refugees, I think 95%, 99% tend to go to the next neighbouring country. So again, we've taken a lot in, but compared to the vast majority of the world, this is why Jordan has 1 million refugees. You know, that we're not seeing the levels of numbers they've had.
Well, we're not the rest of the world. Richard, you know yourself as a Conservative Member of Parliament in the last administration, it hurt your party hugely.
Yes, it did. One problem I think everyone's got, and Europe is waking up to it, is free movement of people. The Germans are now causing quite a lot of angst in the EU by saying they want their borders back. Well, I mean, well done, Germany. Let's all wake up to the real world. If that was reintroduced, that would have a huge impact on these gangs because they wouldn't be able to flow through these countries and get to France, which is a safe country. And the second point, I think this is a threat to national security. I agree with you entirely. I think it's a matter now for the armed forces, I would say. And I would say we need some sort of ships in the middle of the channel to say no further. That's it. And if they get there, they're turned around and sent back. Now, I know this would cause a huge noise with France. We'd have a sort of Cod War situation, no doubt. Yeah. But at least we'd make the point to the gangs. You get to the middle of the channel, and we will make every effort we can to put these illegal migrants, as you rightly say, back into boats, safe boats, and take them back to France.
Yes, we couldn't tow back those dinghies.
No,
they're not safe boats.
You have a whole lot of boats out there.
So you need the Royal Marines.
And they just take them straight back.
But, you know, can I just ask Richard whether you felt Boris Johnson may have missed a trick in 2021? Because I think the thing that riles a lot of people up is because we have this constant daily commentary and scenes of people crossing the channel, which, first of all, is extremely dangerous and we sadly see people dying. Second of all, there's gangs making a huge trade out of this and it's a huge issue that we do need to stop. But in 2021, the Interior Minister of France said, well, I'll tell you what, it's doing both of our heads in. Why don't we process them at northern France? Therefore, you're stopping the danger of people coming across and potentially loss of life, but also you can do the processing to see if they really are refugees. You're therefore not having people put up in bed and breakfast, temporary accommodation, because that's a whole other racket, these hotels that are signing contracts with the government where they're making millions off putting people up.
Well, I don't know about processing, but we are spending, I'm not quite sure how much, but many, many billions of pounds to the French government to protect their northern
well, actually,
and these boats are still coming.
It's about 500 million.
And with all the modern technology, I cannot understand how these boats are not spotted.
Well, the point...
you've got...
Do you know what? Do you know what? I mean, it's easy to blame the French. Truth is, they've got hundreds of miles, square miles of sand dunes. They're taking off on beaches across a 100-mile stretch. It's not easy. It's not easy. Moving on to an issue that is downstream from this... And it's about a lack of integration. It's about a clash of cultures. It's about the appalling story that broke in Rotherham, you'll remember, back in 2014. Well, the law does move very, very slowly. But finally, a group of men were in Sheffield Crown Court last week and they received very, very long prison sentences. 7 men, 106 years of prison sentences. Astonishingly, GB News were the only media organisation that covered the story. And one of the girls, who'd been repeatedly raped, etc., had in her victim impact statement that she hoped that the Pakistani man who had done this to her at the end of his lengthy prison term was deported back to Pakistan. And the judge removed that from her victim impact statement. Maybe it's no surprise we have a case in Rochdale where somebody who was a serial abuser, 9 years on, is still living in the same community as his victims as he goes through the legal process and claims that because of his human rights, he can't be deported, and then claims that he's renounced his Pakistani citizenship. And it is just the most astonishing story. Richard, only GB News there. It's as if we're just brushing this all under the carpet. It's all too difficult.
I would have hoped that after the past case, this would have really been, there would be a different attitude to all this. It seems that people are terrified, and news organisations, and I include in this, to actually say what it is. These are, in the main, Pakistani men, sick paedophiles, preying on vulnerable young girls. Now, to them, these girls are nothing more than meat.
Yeah.
This is completely unacceptable. And if they're not British citizens, they should be sent straight home, back to where they came from. If they are, as they have, they've been in jail for many years, and so they should be.
Absolutely shocking, Matthew, the whole thing, shocking. And it was covered up at the beginning. It was covered up, the police knew, everyone knew. And still, even when we get to this stage, the British media seemed reluctant to talk about it.
Yeah, and it only fosters further discontent in communities that feel rightly or wrongly, as second-class citizens sometimes, or feeling like they're put last, and it shouldn't be the case. I think I'm not sure, and I'm happy to be corrected, whether it is a majority of Pakistani men. I think
it was in Rotherham, yeah.
In Rotherham, yes.
Overwhelming.
Take that. That's fine. I think the bigger issue that may play out with these sort of issues is the woman in question, bless her, was saying, she hoped this person would be sent back from whence they came. And I think the problem is once somebody has been here long enough and is a British citizen, we can't do that, obviously. Now, the punishment is he's been given a long prison sentence and whatever else. I suppose the concern is why the judge took it out. I can only assume, and I hope not, that it's further proof of he didn't want any sort of incitement. And I think it's good that we have an independent judiciary and whatever else, but I think it's quite wrong when we're telling people what they can put in their impact statement.
Yeah, that's right. And particularly the girl who's gone through that. In a sense, Mike, I mean, this one's a funny one because in the way that he's renounced Pakistani status and therefore Pakistan say they won't have him. But when it comes to any form of deportation, we are up against ECHR.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, in this case, it seems very clear-cut to me, basic common sense and moral values. If somebody has dual nationality or if they're of a foreign nationality, they've committed a crime of this scale, they should serve their sentence and they should be deported. No ifs, no buts. In terms of why we can't do this, in some cases it's due to bureaucratic indifference and incompetence, but there is a sort of European Convention of Human Rights element to it because we have the Human Rights Act. This enshrines the ECHR into domestic law, and you have what's called the principle of non-refoulement. So it's very difficult to deport people to their country of origin if there's any risk of harassment or humiliation in some way. So that does absolutely have an impact on deportations.
Mike Jones, as ever, thank you for joining us. And folks, I've told you before, the ECHR is going to be a very big issue over the course of the next few years. In a moment, let's talk about electric cars and your reluctance at home to buy them on the scale that governments think you should.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I've got a question for you here, Mr. Motivator. Each time I will try and do a Couch to 5K, and I start, and then it stops, and then I'll have another go. It's baby steps, though, for most of us, isn't it? You've got to start slow, because I also see people go out and run, do that, and then do too much, and they get completely exhausted and think, I can't do this anymore. So what is it? You have to start slowly, right? Is that fair?
Well, with everything that you do need to start slowly. But what's more important than that? You need to identify an activity that suits you. Now, the thing is, you may want to do Couch to 5K, but let's say you have a preponderance for swimming. Maybe swimming is what you really like, or dancing is what you like. You find the activity that suits you. And I have to say, you'll never see a happy jogger. They're happy afterwards. They have enjoyed the experience, but they're not happy whilst doing it. But you must start with everything.
Have you ever been out of shape, though? Because whilst I find you really inspiring, I feel as though you've always been in good nick, and therefore it's kind of come easy to you. Whereas I think, there are plenty of people who have a tendency to put on weight. I mean, I can look at chocolate and I feel like I put on weight. And it's a slog, especially if you've taken your foot off the gas for a while. Getting back into it's brutal. What do you know about that?
Well, let me just say this to you, that in the early days, and I can go back, don't forget 71 years, our activity level was much higher. But this is something that's really just happened in the last 30 years. So those 30 years, we have changed. We now spend more time in front of the computer. We spend more time sitting down. So that's why we need gyms and we need to get up. Now, gyms don't suit everybody. And that's why I do free classes. Free club, you can join. Everyone can get access to movement in their home. But you have got to make that first step.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So will the new setup work? Ryan says, much like the NHS, the government can spend as much as they like on their new task force, but nothing will change. There are two issues: lack of will from the staff, and secondly, the meddling ECHR. Kevin says, Labour could not stop a milk float, never mind anything else. And John says, Starmer's waffle to stop the illegal immigration will not work. He is just like Sunak. He is completely gutless and will not confront the lefty lawyers. But the point is, there's no point confronting the lefty lawyers. My belief is that all the while we have the Human Rights Act from 1998, which incorporates the ECHR, our judges will always lean on that. Right, let's talk electric cars, shall we? Theresa May announces a few years ago that after 2040, there will be no new petrol and diesel cars sold in the UK. That wasn't good enough for a newly married Boris Johnson. Not that I'm suggesting, of course, that she influenced this policy at all, but he decided, no. After 2030, there will be no new sales of petrol or diesel cars. When, of course, they realised by 2023 this was completely impossible, they shifted the target to 2035. But then Labour get in on a manifesto of going back to 2030 for no new sale. I'm not making this up, I promise you, of petrol or diesel cars, but today announced that actually, up until 2035, hybrids will be sold. Now, there's a big problem with EVs. You're not buying them. You're all supposed to buy electric vehicles, because if you don't, the world is going to be destroyed by global warming. At least that's what the Labour and Conservative parties seem to believe. However, there is a regulation still in place that says that we have to get to 80% EVs by 2030, and we're currently at about 18%. And already, petrol cars are being rationed by distributors. You go and try and buy a brand new petrol car, you'll wait 6 or 9 months to get it. So do we need a complete rethink on EVs? And by the way, you know, if all of this works, it's fantastic. But Richard Drax, I just think they're going to fall flat on their face with this. It's not possible, is it?
It's not possible. I mean, there's the infrastructure, for starters, that are on the plug-in points. The cars don't have the range. They're too expensive. They're too heavy. They're tearing up the Earth's resources to make the batteries. I think it's just a massive con, frankly. And in Oslo, my wife is Norwegian. They had one of the coldest winters this year, minus 23, I believe it was, and they are forced to buy battery cars over there. They hate them. You got in their car, turn on the heating, turn on the lights, turn on the radios to the news, and the battery just does that. And they're all now going back to buying petrol cars. They don't want battery cars. So it is, and I also think that batteries will be overtaken in time by something else. A non-polluting fuel, which would make sense with this internal combustion engine.
Well, actually,
which is being tested now.
But if you think about it, actually, you know, the miles we get per gallon are vastly improved on what they were a few years ago. Yeah. Fuel is improving. I just wonder, Matthew Torbet, is this one of those areas where, yeah, OK, it sounds lovely. It sounds fab. You know, the idea that there'll be no fumes by roads, main roads, etc., it sounds terrific. But is it one of those areas where just people in Westminster, I mean by that the political and media class, are just out of touch with reality?
I think it could be, which is why I thought we should probably welcome today's announcement, whether that be because they've realised it cannot be done, or whether, I would like to think, with a sort of Labour hat on, that we don't want to push this price onto people that maybe can't afford it. I think if we want to encourage the pick-up and the take-up of things like more renewable vehicles, whatever they are, then we should be offering quite a generous scrappage scheme. If you're encouraging people, I'll tell you what, we'll take your old diesel car, petrol car, however, we'll scrap it in and we'll give you a load of money to go and get an electric one. I think that may be a greater and easier transition. I don't think, and I'm no expert on the climate, but I think we need to make sure it's good for everybody, not just for those that can afford it when we make a transition.
The problem is we've got to produce the power.
Well, that's true as well. I remember listening years ago to somebody that was an expert in the field, and they said the issue they've had, or that they could foresee, was sort of brownouts that are quite common in America, whereby your power goes out for a certain amount of time, then comes back on. It can be quite erratic, and obviously you don't want that in certain situations either. Which leads us into Ed Miliband, the big plan, wind turbines everywhere. Is it going to work? I don't know. I would hope so. Again, I'm no expert in this. Ed has done lots of work in the energy field for a while. What people think of that, I don't know. But, you know, he's certainly seen as the man that Labour should go to on this sort of stuff. I get on really well with the people around him, and they are some of the more cleverer people I've met on most things. So I would hope that it will work.
Funny thing is, it doesn't really matter whether I'm sitting here with a Labour administration or a Conservative one, because Richard Drax, the debate's pretty much the same, isn't it?
Well, if you remember, it was Baroness May who brought this in. There was no vote, no decision. It was just, woof, we're going to do this by 2050. No debate, nothing.
This is the net zero agenda.
The net zero, which is all part of. And you've got this committee, this very powerful committee, which is working behind the scenes with introducing budgets that the government have to keep to. These budgets have become more and more punitive, and the people of this country will begin to feel the pinch more and more and more. These unrealistic expectations, they're not pragmatic, they are totally unrealistic, are pushed on us legally.
What I'm absolutely certain of, looking at the auctions for the wind farms that took place a couple of weeks ago, is that electricity prices will be rising for many, many years to come, and that's going to impact on everybody. And yeah, you know, we can cut our carbon dioxide emissions, but all the while China, Indonesia and India completely ignore the whole thing. We're not really making very much difference. But I'll return to that point. The political differences between these two parties are pretty marginal.
I agree. That's one reason, I think another reason we lost. People lost faith in a pragmatic approach, which the Conservative Party has always boasted itself to follow. Pragmatism. We were being totally unpragmatic.
And what did people vote Labour for? Was it because they were anti-Tory?
Yes. I said for quite some time, when I was on the doors, there was no real love for Labour. There was a lot of indifference, and I actually saw the 2024 election as a huge protest vote, basically, as we don't want the Tories anymore, we'll take whatever. And I think I've said for some time, they need to be wary of your party. I think that is the real danger. In 99 seats, they've come second. And I think I would caution the party against seeing seats as the amount of votes. As you saw, the turnout wasn't very big, certainly even in Starmer's seat alone. So they've got to be careful. And a lot of this doom and gloom ain't going to do them any favours either.
I think you're right that it was an anti-Tory vote. The whole election was about an anti-Tory vote. But I also think just the fact that the policy differences between the two leading parties are so narrow has kept many people at home. In a moment, we will discuss a really difficult issue. Work-shy Britain, but also the idea, apparently, according to our business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, that if we sort of work more from home, we'd all be a whole lot more productive. I just don't believe it.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Dry for many of us over the next 24 hours with clear skies, although overnight it will turn somewhat cloudier in some places, notably towards the south and southeast because of the winds coming in around an area of high pressure and arriving from the east. Those easterly winds will increase the cloud overnight across East Anglia, the Midlands and the southeast, eventually reaching parts of East Wales by the early hours. Further north, we lose the cloud across northern Scotland, but Under any clear spells across Scotland and Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England, a few mist and fog patches could form by dawn. However, it's across southern parts of the country where we'll see the cloudiest skies. Away from the cloud, a chilly start once again with temperatures in the single figures, but under the sheet of cloud, a milder start compared with Tuesday, albeit with grey skies. The clearest skies will be across Northern Ireland, Northern England and much of Scotland. In sheltered spots, away from main urban areas and away from hilltops, temperatures could be as low as 3 to 6 Celsius, and any mist and fog could last until 9 or 10 a.m. before disappearing. Once the mist and fog does disappear, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England sees once again a beautiful sunny day, and across central and southern parts through the afternoon the cloud will disappear back to the east coast where it could linger in places, and then another sunny day is expected for the vast majority. 24 or 25 Celsius possible in places, feeling warm in the sun, but there'll be less sun around on Thursday morning, a bit more cloud across eastern, central and southern England as well as East Wales. Once again, that cloud should retreat back to the east coast through the afternoon, but in some places it could stick around for most of the day. Friday, plenty of showers developing across England and Wales, drier and sunnier further north.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Britain I grew up was the most peaceful, gentle society that has ever existed. That has been destroyed.
Opinion polls show immigration is the #1 concern to the British public. Are you proud to be British?
Yeah, I'm ever so proud.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and in this documentary, I want to find out how Britain became a nation of immigrants. Immigration, the Truth. Available from the 19th of September at gbnews.com.
So in 2019, 5% of us worked primarily from home. Now, there are 16% who work exclusively from home, with another 28% following a hybrid model. It seems that work from home has become very, very fashionable. But the new Labour government, unlike Jacob Rees-Mogg, who wanted to force everyone back to the office, and unlike Amazon and other companies that are saying, you know what, you've got to come back to the office, it seems the Labour government is following a very different line. The Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, who, by the way, has never worked in business, let alone set up a small business and employed people, he wants to end the culture of presenteeism, which means the culture of turning up for work. Apparently, this will boost our productivity, and that is what Labour believe. I think this is a complete lot of baloney. I honestly think, if you look at our productivity figures, they're dire already. And when you work from home, or you try to work from home, there are all sorts of distractions. Knocks at the door, the dog's not feeling well, the neighbour comes around, whatever it might be. I also think work from home, and I mean this very strongly, is very unfair on young people. Young, ambitious people in whatever work they're in only get on by learning from other more experienced people. And actually, do you know something? Being part of a team that works, has common goals and objectives, is I think, one of the most rewarding parts of work. So I feel pretty strongly about this. Richard, what say you?
Well, if you look at what they're suggesting, as I understand it, the earlier suggestion was that these working from home days, before you are going to be forced to let your employees do what they want, we're going to be Friday and Monday. Well, isn't that a surprise? What do you call that? That's a long weekend, isn't it? That's going to knock our ability to create jobs and everything else. And I'm very concerned, as an employer myself, all these new laws that are going to come in under Labour, they are going to stop employers employing people. They're not going to create jobs. They will do completely the opposite.
No, it worries me. And strange, survey out today, our GPs now work an average of only 26 hours a week. I mean, there are millions, over 9 million people of potential working age not working. I mean, has the work culture has the pandemic destroyed the work culture?
Possibly. I think, controversially, like a lot of us, I was based mostly at home during the pandemic.
Sure.
And I did see there was positives and negatives. The positives was I did feel more productive. Now, maybe that was the urgency of the time. I was mucking in, helping MPs with casework and whatnot.
Yep.
The flip side of that, and it plays into a little bit of your young people and getting to know people within teams, big part of my job was communications and dealing with journalists. Well, I didn't see anybody, therefore the work dried up slightly when you're trying to get good stories out there. I think the other point is there was a bit of a...
But see, that, in a sense, is where the private sector gets hurt most by this. Because if you're in the private sector, you have to... If you're in a service, you have to keep new clients coming in through the door. The way you do that is to be part of the swim, to be out meeting people. But I can see why a government dominated by people that have lived in the public sector find this incredibly attractive.
Yeah. Which is interesting, because lots of jobs in the public sector, you've got to turn up, whether it be nurses, train drivers...
Well, the civil service don't.
Well, maybe so, but I think it's... The other point was, during the pandemic, there was this sort of running joke that Pret was going to go bust, nobody was going into the office anymore. But we are a largely service-based economy, and actually that can change things like our high street forever. And I suppose a part of it... I mean, I know people that run small businesses and do 4-day working weeks, and actually the productivity of the company appears to have gone up. Now, whether that would work on larger businesses, I don't know, and it's only anecdotal. But I wonder whether the ideology will trump some of the evidence, because it will only be those that are most privileged that get to benefit from these sort of stay-at-home things, whereas those that were at the coalface, our key workers during the pandemic, absolutely will not.
That point, as you say, if you're a train driver or whatever, you can't work from home. Yeah, it is generally the better paid who will benefit from this, but I fear that it's something that is wonderful if you work in the public sector, but really rather less good if you're in the private. Now, a little story from me, the What the Farage moment. I couldn't resist this. Alison Rose, remember her? Dame Alison Rose. She was the boss of NatWest, who broke the first rule of banking, which is client confidentiality, when she told something to the BBC's business editor about me that wasn't true, and lost her job, and quite right too, even if the so-called inquiry afterwards whitewashed the whole thing. Well, we learnt earlier on this year that she was joining private equity firm Charterhouse Capital in some capacity. But Mishcon de Rea, and these are, lawyers that have looked after the royal family and many others, and it was to whom she turned during her difficulties with me. They've given her a big job, and guess what she'll be doing? Have a guess. She'll be the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Chief Officer. Yes, absolutely. She'll be there to make sure that Mishcon is absolutely full of diverse people. Don't worry about their abilities. Don't worry if they're no good for the job. Just fulfil the quotas. Well, all I can say to Mishcon de Rea is very, very good luck to you. Now, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, chose Kew Gardens this morning for his first big speech as Foreign Secretary. Let's just have a look at a little snippet of it.
The threat may not feel as urgent as a terrorist or an imperialist autocrat, but it is more fundamental. It is systemic, it's pervasive, and accelerating towards us at pace.
Well, quite why, Matthew, David Lammy thinks that climate change is a bigger threat than terrorism or global dictators, I don't know. But it's almost as if this is an indication of what our foreign policy is going to be. Our foreign policy is going to be about climate change.
Yeah, quite possibly. I think there's two things, really. What I would prefer to see from the Foreign Secretary, regardless of it, is to see that he should be standing up for freedom and democracy in the nation state, as we did sort of World War II and always should do. I think if I was to try and make method of his potentially perceived madness talking about climate change being fundamentally more pressing than terrorism, climate change is going to pose a big issue when it comes to migration. If we believe that the projections that are made...
That was his argument, yeah.
because I think you're talking about hundreds of millions of people due to research done by the World Bank, 260 million people in the worst case, and then you're looking at maybe even 1 billion people by 2050. You've obviously got rising sea levels. If people think migration to this country is an issue now, we may well get to a real boiling point by 2050 if that's the case. Now, what I would say to that is that could promote, as per your point earlier, more terrorism, either domestic because of the clash of cultures or the clash of society, or people getting in that.
That's all assuming that climate change, global warming is happening and will continue to happen.
Well, yes, I believe it is. Again, I'm no expert. I do always think one of the most intelligent men I'd ever met. He's not with us anymore. He was spot on about everything. Did not believe climate change was real, and it always leaves that little chink in the back of my mind.
You know, the late great Sir Patrick Moore. I asked him this question about 20 years ago. He said, well, of course, man must have some influence with what he's done and the size of the population on the planet. He said, but sunspot activity is a much, much bigger factor. But, you know, you take as you find with these things. Richard, it was a very odd... I mean, for a first big speech for a foreign secretary, the setting, the style, very strange.
I bet the focus groups are saying that they should go on banging on about climate change. Climate change, of course, is an issue, but a bit like the Remainers and the Brexit debate, all this doom and gloom and you're doomed and the whole country's going to the dogs, actually has the opposite effect on people who might actually think, OK, let's not have petrol cars and diesel cars and all this sort of thing. So they're destroying their own argument with this continuous run of bad news. And I don't think it's very wise of him in comparing climate change to terrorism, which is right across the globe and a major international problem, and we see and hear about it every single day. So I don't think the two equate. It didn't sit together, in my view.
Very, very odd indeed, is all I can say, and particularly as we have what is going on in the Middle East and all sorts of events there today, which we'll no doubt talk about tomorrow, what is going on in Ukraine, and who knows what may go on in Taiwan. I would have thought that, you know, the threat of global war being closer than it's probably been at any point in my lifetime might have been more important. Hey, I don't know. So over the weekend, there was a second assassination attempt on Donald Trump within the space of 2 months. I did speak to him on the phone yesterday evening. Is it all about rhetoric? And dare we be complacent in our country?
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
So Prince Harry, apparently, Operation Bring Harry In from the Cold. Do you feel there's any truth to this?
Lots of tongues are wagging, Nana. I mean, you know, we heard that he was at the memorial for Lord Robert Fellows, and obviously William was there as well. And so there was lots of, everyone going into overdrive. That was in Stetisham, Norfolk the other day. He wasn't going to attend, said the People, a mouthpiece of his. And I would have actually thought that maybe a lookalike had turned up. But now we have been led to believe that Harry's been talking to people from friends from his old life. And it's not that he wants to make a permanent move to the UK, so I believe. What I've heard, it's more about his reputation.
Well, he wants to have his cake and eat it, by the sounds of it. I mean, obviously, no good cake it remains uneaten.
We know that the royal family is his currency. I mean, even his late mother, obviously he's almost usurped her memory, and he needs this. He needs this to make money. Of course, he raced in for Lord Robert Fellows' memorial service. So there's lots of ambiguous behaviour, and he is going to be, in New York. We call it the silly season, don't we? And we're also looking. There's lots of different stories that are coming out, but he needs to tell stuff. He's going to be in New York, and it's. We've got to remember the enormous amount of hurt and offence. I mean, Prince William absolutely reeling. Poor Princess Catherine. Spare book coming out at the most awful time. And you've got the Netflix
series.
It's absolutely, this is a rehabilitation strategy.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's bad enough being shot at and hit at a public rally, but for Donald Trump, his two really safe spaces are Mar-a-Lago and the golf club, which is just down the road. And that's where he spends his time, surrounded by his family, by his friends, and where he relaxes and enjoys himself. But, of course, he was on the 5th, heading for a birdie, according to him, when rifle shots rang out, because somebody who for 12 hours had waited in the bushes was about 400 yards away on the 6th hole. And if the Secret Service had not spotted the guy with the rifle, Donald Trump would not be alive today. There was quite a tribute paid to him by his golfing partner on Fox News last night.
I got to see a man who was stoic, courageous, cared about his friends' safety and first before his own life. He was an inspiration to everybody who was around him yesterday.
Well, I must admit, I don't bother him much, but I picked up the phone last night and spoke to him, and he answered the phone first ring. I just wanted to find out how he was. He was putting, a strong, brave face on it and keen to talk about what was happening in Britain, etc. So I'm pleased that I did that. But, hey, this has to have a really very, very, very tough effect on him and for the next 50 days of this campaign and probably for the rest of his life. I'm pleased to say that somebody rather more important than me picked up the phone yesterday, Joe Biden. And you may say not before time, but Biden is now going to afford both Trump and Harris the same level of Secret Service coverage that the President of the USA has. Frankly, it should have been like this from the very start. And if that had been the case, the perimeters of the golf course would have been searched before they went out and played. But it does come down to rhetoric. Trump says it's the rhetoric that has caused this. And, Biden said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. Other elected people from a Democratic Party have said he has to be eliminated. Now, look, there can be bad things said on both sides of the political debate. I'm not pretending it's all one way. But you do get the feeling sometimes, at least I do, Matthew, that kind of what is said about Trump does engender a certain kind of hatred.
Yeah, I don't think it means he should be shot at. I don't think he ultimately helps himself. I think I think there's rhetoric on both sides.
No, I accept that.
I think part of it is because he's a bit of a character. There's an element of caricature about him. Therefore, people feel they can maybe say things or do things about him that they may not say about Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. I think the thing that sort of sunk in for me yesterday, Donald Trump's one of those rare politicians that really does grind my gears at times, and I think, oh my God, most of the time I can let things go, but he really does. I saw his son tweet, who also does the same to me, actually, but he said, sometimes more so, but he said, I'm sick of having to sit down my son, Donald Trump's grandchild, and explain that he's nearly been killed again this time, and there's it's happened more than twice now. And I think that's the human element. He's whatever people think of him, and there's many things that people can think of him, there's a human being there, and there's a family involved at the end of the day, and we've seen too much of it across the globe, really, and it puts people off going into politics as well.
Well, I must admit, during the campaign, first day, I had a milkshake chucked in my face. 2 days later, a cup filled with cement was thrown at me. And nothing like what Trump's gone through, but I must admit, for the next few days, I was thinking, how do I campaign? What, what do I do? What's going to happen next? It's got to be very tough in his head right at the moment, Richard, hasn't it?
I think very tough. Nigel, what concerns me, I'm talking about the leader of the free world, whoever the president's going to be, and politics in America. When I went across there twice with the Defence Committee, the Defence Committee we spoke to said that, in their view, and they agreed with us, that American politics has become so divisive. They are poles apart. Yeah. And until there's some coming together, not agreeing with each other necessarily, of course, but until there's some calming down, you've got really the extremes on both wings prepared to do very stupid things. And they've all got guns. And if they're incentivised to do something stupid, there are one or two lunatics who will.
The point about guns is well made. But one of the things that I did discuss on the phone with the 45th president was the fact that we're not immune from it here.
No.
And we have seen, well, I mean, take David Amos, the murder of David Amos that took place not very long ago.
And Joe Cox.
Joe Cox murdered a few years.
And I'm sure Jacob, who's here now, he and I have had some very unpleasant stuff sent through our emails at the early hours of the morning, normally. Threats to, in one occasions, to kill. Some of our female colleagues have had threats of rape. And it's got, in the 14 years I was there, and I don't know if Jacob agrees, it's got far, far worse. The rhetoric is far, far worse.
Yeah, I think the Speaker is highly, highly acutely aware of this and says that it's absolutely top of his priority to make sure that the parliamentary estate is safe, but equally for elected members when they're off it, that they're safe, and they're making big efforts. But I'm sure for some of the new Labour MPs, I bet they're pretty shocked already.
Yeah, I think so. I've spoken to some of them even. I mean, some of them are shocked over the backlash to the winter fuel allowance, and they've gone, "Oh my God, the emails." I said, "Well, you've not seen nothing." I worked there through the Brexit era, which was, a real, and you'll have had your own experiences, a real hard, emotionally driven, at times upsetting period of politics. And again, that was a very divisive referendum, which people had strong views on both sides. I think it just worries me for the talent that will be scared off. I go back to my old university and colleges a lot and do talks about what I've done in politics and stuff like that and what I do now. And you ask people, I've asked at the very beginning, how many of you, these are all studying political degrees, how many of you would like to go into politics? And out of a class of 50 or 60, you're getting 3. And I'm not saying you should, but if you extrapolate that across the country, it can't just be the North West.
Now, that would have been very different a decade ago, wouldn't it?
I think so.
Very different.
Because you can go and earn a load of money in the private sector without the front-facing stuff, without the abuse on social media, the death threats. And, we've had it more recently. We had it with the Gaza vote. I was nearly walking the MP I was working for at the time home because I was worried, because of the way he voted, that he may get attacked on the way home. There's a lot of emotion in politics.
Well, Jake has been followed home.
No. I mean, it's no. Panel, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. And Jacob, it is becoming more of a problem. I mean, the fact that these appalling events are happening in America, there's no room for complacency here, is there?
Regrettably not. You know my views. I hate admitting this because I think when you complain, you give the blighters more publicity, and that it's better not to complain, just get on with it, and not give them the oxygen of publicity. But it is definitely a less pleasant atmosphere than it was. And I always thought one should just put up with it. I chose to go into public life. That was my choice.
Yeah.
I was pretty put out when my son, over the summer, got hate mail. And he's a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
I think sending hate mail to a 16-year-old is the lowest of the low. Yeah. And I think that's...
Yeah, I've always taken a similar view. I don't really mind what verbal abuse I get.
Yeah.
When it comes to things being thrown in my face, I take a slightly different view. But when it extends to the family, it really is beyond the pale.
I've been luckier than you on things straight. I once went to a Conservative dinner I was dressing, and I arrived there and all these people were patting me on the back, and I hate being patted on the back. I don't understand it. Unbeknownst to me, whilst I'd been going in, someone had thrown milk on me and they were wiping it off, so they've actually been quite kind. But I hadn't noticed.
Jacob, in a few seconds, what have you got?
What are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about David Lammy saying we've all got to be green, and being green is more important than combating terrorism, which just seems bonkers.
Yes, or even perhaps facing a more frightening global military situation.
Indeed. He's not worried about Putin. He's not worried about Hamas. He's just worried about whether we have a few more windmills.
Well, it seems to be a line for the government. And he also said that the Tories had been environmental dinosaurs, which struck me as being rather nonsense because their policies weren't that different. Before he answers, I'm going to say that's the end, weather with Aidan McGibbon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Dry for many of us over the next 24 hours with clear skies, although overnight it will turn somewhat cloudier in some places, notably towards the south and southeast because of the winds coming in around an area of high pressure and arriving from the east. Those easterly winds will increase the cloud overnight across East Anglia, the Midlands and the southeast, eventually reaching parts of East Wales by the early hours. Further north, we lose the cloud across northern Scotland, but under any clear spells across Scotland and Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England, a few mist and fog patches could form by dawn. However, it's across southern parts of the country where we'll see the cloudiest skies. Away from the cloud, a chilly start once again with temperatures in the single figures, but under the sheet of cloud, a milder start compared with Tuesday,